Welcome to the One Year Book of Mormon. A non-Mormon reads through the Book of Mormon. 2 Nephi, chapter 32. Chapter overview. Nephi continues his sermon, which is a mishmash of many New Testament passages and concepts. Things like ponder in your hearts, receive the Holy Ghost, the tongue of angels, ask and knock, enter in by the way, and pray and not faint. I could probably have done this with most of the chapters of the Book of Mormon, except the ones that are more narrative and historic in nature. But the ones that talk about doctrine are very, very often have words drawn from the Bible, words and phrases drawn from the King James version of the Bible. Verse 2 has the term tongue of angels, meaning the language of the angels, which of course comes from 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, where Paul, some 600 years after this was supposedly first written, says, "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels." In addition to this blatant anachronism, Nephi would never have used that, no man in the 500s BC would have. Here, as in all the other places that angels are mentioned in the Book of Mormon, they are clearly distinguished from humans, while modern Mormonism teaches that angels, God, and man are all the same species, just in different appearances or forms or levels of exaltation. You would think that you would find angels actually portrayed as men in the Book of Mormon, in this most correct book on earth. Verse 4 sounds like Nephi is saying, if you don't understand, ask God for clarification. Okay, that's fine. But how does that jive with the previous statements that Nephi makes, in which he delights in plainness, and that the Book of Mormon is clear, unlike the Bible, from which many plain and precious truths are missing? Also, Nephi here says that they don't understand because ye ask not, neither do ye knock. Now, anybody familiar with the New Testament and Jesus' teaching here recognize this easily as coming from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 7, or the Sermon on the Plain in Luke's near parallel passage in Luke 11, where Jesus says, ask and it shall be given you, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. Right? We know that. But how could they have known that in the 500s BC? How could they have hoped to understand what Nephi meant by saying they don't understand because they won't knock? It makes no sense unless it was written after the time of Christ. Nephi claims to be speaking plainly, but this is exceedingly unclear unless you're a Christian familiar with the teachings of Jesus living after the time of Jesus. Verse 6 says, behold, this is the doctrine of Christ, and there will be no more doctrine given until after he shall manifest himself unto you in the flesh. And when he shall manifest himself unto you in the flesh, the things which he shall say unto you, ye shall observe to do. Again, this is supposedly 600 years before Christ. So as we go through reading the Book of Mormon, we should find that there is no doctrine revealed in the Book of Mormon between this time and the time that Jesus appears to the Book of Mormon peoples 500 to 600 years from this point. We'll see if the Book of Mormon is consistent on this point or if they introduce doctrinal issues in the forthcoming books. In verse 7, Nephi says he can't say more because the Spirit is stopping him. What about Mormons' vaunted free agency? They cling to it above all else, that God won't make somebody do something because man is a free moral agent and can do whatever he wants. Verse 8 is Nephi addressing my beloved brethren, though the majority of the people in this group would have to be his offspring and nieces and nephews. I know. You can use the term brethren in a broader sense of the term just to mean your kinsmen. But it sounds like something more that Paul or one of the other New Testament writers would have said about people who are his own age, his brethren, his fellows, rather than what a patriarch would say to a fairly small group of people who are mostly young enough to be his children or are actually his children and nieces and nephews. And remember, these people are called Nephites because they're primarily the offspring of Nephi. And yet he calls them my brethren rather than my sons. Just doesn't really make sense.